Megan Carr and Cherish Disantis seemed destined to become best friends. The girls were born just a day apart, attended the same school, clubs, and activities together, and their parents thought each of them had 2 daughters. Both of their families were quite wealthy. Megan's father owned and managed a company specializing in drilling water wells. It had been a family business since the 1940s, bringing in around $2 million annually. However, by 1992, Megan's parents had divorced, and she lived with her mom, Shirley. As for Cherish's father, he was a well-known tobacco auctioneer in town and nationwide for over 30 years. While such auctions are not as common now back then, it was a thriving business. In the spring of 1992, 16-year-old Megan and Cherish were popular students at Thomasville High School in Georgia. Their families made sure their daughters behaved appropriately, although there was never a need for concern. The girls never caused trouble, excelled in their studies, and all their activities were within the bounds of propriety. Even during vacations, they looked forward to peaceful beach getaways rather than raucous parties. Thursday, March 26, 1992, marked the last day before spring break. After that, students could forget about school until April 6th. Megan and Cherish were eager to squeeze in some beach time. Not in Thomasville, of course, but in Florida, less than 60 kilometers away. For Thomasville students, crossing the border to visit the beaches of Tallahassee was a common practice. It took about 2 hours, and the trip was quite enjoyable. The young women preferred a single beach that wasn't overrun by tourists. It was called Bold Point, a picturesque 13-kilometer shoreline, popular for birdwatching, wildlife, and yes, alligators, hence its name. Overall, it was a wonderful spot to relax under the sun and take a swim. That was Megan and Cherish's plan. Therefore, at 10 o'clock on Friday morning, the girls packed their swimsuits, towels, and, hopping into Megan's new Honda, headed for Florida, planning to spend the entire day at the beach. They intended to return home that same evening. Some of their friends were supposed to join them, but at the last moment, some had second thoughts or urgent matters came up. The girls arrived at Alligator Point Beach around noon. Megan parked the car, they grabbed their towels, changed into their bikinis, and turned on the rock station on the boombox. After wandering leisurely along the beach for a few hours, a married couple noticed the girls and, seeing that they were resting in a somewhat unusual pose, one girl lying on top of the other, decided not to disturb them. The couple veered wide around them to avoid causing any disturbance. However, on their way back, they realized that the girls hadn't moved at all. Even as they openly stared at them for minutes, the girls remained still. The man asked his wife to stay put while he approached them closer. He saw blood and shouted to his wife that the girls appeared to be dead and they needed to call the police. Alligator Point Beach was a family-friendly beach where visitors enjoyed walks and picnics. The police were aware that there had never been attacks on women at this beach. Therefore, the arriving officers were also horrified by what had happened. The ongoing contrast of the radio continuing to play rock music added to the chilling atmosphere of the murder scene juxtaposed against the carefree beach setting. The officers found the girls' identification and conducted a preliminary identification. They were 16-year-old Megan and Cherish. In addition to their documents, all their belongings were nearby: wallets, cash, Megan's car keys, beach bags, and towels. The girls were in bikinis, so the police ruled out robbery or violence against them as motives. Megan had a towel draped over her head soaked in her blood. Cherish lay on Megan with a head wound as well. As later determined by the medical examiner, each girl had been shot twice in the head from close range with a .38 caliber firearm. There was a lot of blood around the bodies. Besides the bullet holes, there were no other injuries on the victims, as if they had been caught off guard and didn't fight for their lives. Therefore, reluctantly, the police had to consider whether this was someone the girls knew. It seemed unlikely that a stranger could have approached so closely without the victims screaming or attempting to escape. And who could have known they would be relaxing in this isolated part of the beach? It appeared that the attack was planned, and someone had been monitoring them and traveled all the way from home. But who would want to kill 2 schoolgirls? The police began interviewing possible witnesses among local residents and regular beachgoers because although it was a remote part of the beach, families were nearby and cars were parked in the lot. They should have heard gunshots or the victims' cries. One regular beachgoer indeed heard sounds around 12:30 that he mistook for fireworks. Now, of course, it was evident he had heard 4 gunshots. Shortly afterward, a car passed by him that he hadn't seen there before. It was a long blue car resembling a Chevrolet Nova or something similar. Officers also went to the parking lot where Megan's car was parked and noticed something strange. There were plenty of open parking spots, but someone had blocked Megan's car in such a way that she couldn't leave. It wasn't a Chevrolet, but the car turned out to be blue. Approaching, the officers saw a man inside with a camera on his lap. When asked what he was doing there, the man explained that he had been photographing birds in the area all day. He had seen people, of course, but not teenage girls dancing on the beach. He rather aggressively stated that he had no interest in watching girls dance on the beach. Curiously, who mentioned anything about dancing on the beach? The man was taken in for questioning and a weapon was found in his trunk. The police were already rubbing their hands, thinking they had quickly solved the case. During questioning, the man admitted he had seen the girls but denied any involvement in the murders, claiming they were alive when he passed by them on the beach. He even underwent a polygraph test. The gun found in his trunk turned out to be a completely different caliber than the murder weapon, so the suspect was released. The bartender from the establishment near the beach where the girls died recalled a strange incident that occurred on the day of the murders involving an unusual visitor. He entered as soon as the establishment opened, ordered a Bloody Mary cocktail, but the bartender wasn't quite ready for service due to a delay, so she told the man the drink would be on the house. However, he insisted on paying. This alone wouldn't have been odd, except for his words. "You'd better take this money because it's the first and last time I'll come in here." Whether he meant to offend her or not, he stayed in the bar for 40 minutes and left shortly before the presumed time of Megan and Cherish's murders. Meanwhile, it was getting dark, approaching dinner time, when Megan and Cherish were expected home, but they hadn't returned. Megan's mother called Cherish's parents to see if her daughter was with them, but they hadn't seen her either. The woman was a bit worried, but she knew the girls were responsible and assumed they were just running a bit late. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The Florida police notified their colleagues in Thomasville about what had happened and asked them to inform the families of the victims. How can anyone prepare someone for the news that their loved one will never come home again? It was a tragedy for both families. They felt as though they had lost two daughters. Although the officers tried to be as tactful as possible, they needed to ask several questions. The girls' relatives explained that they spent almost all their time together, either at Megan's house or Cherish's. The only other person they spent a lot of time with was Alex, Cherish's boyfriend. The families insisted that Alex had nothing to do with the murders, but everyone was considered a suspect until ruled out by the police. Moreover, they were troubled by how the killer got so close to the girls. This meant they didn't see him as a threat. Therefore, suspicion fell on Alex next. But he seemed genuinely grieving, just like everyone else, unable to believe they were gone. The police were convinced that Alex must have known where the girls would be hanging out. He replied that he could have found out if he wanted to, but they never discussed it. Additionally, when Megan and Cherish went to the beach, he was at work in the factory. His colleagues indeed confirmed the young man's alibi, so the police left Alex alone and allowed him to mourn the loss of his girlfriend and her friend. The police had no solid leads and disclosed almost nothing to the public. Therefore, all sorts of wild rumors circulated about the motive for the murders. Some speculated that the girls were random victims of drug smuggling, with smugglers landing on the beach and killing unwanted witnesses. However, there was no evidence of any boat landing on the beach. Others recalled that the beach used to be a nudist beach and suggested the girls might have been targeted for occasionally sunbathing topless there. But Megan and Cherish were in bikinis, so this theory didn't make sense. The most plausible theory was that someone was upset about Cherish's father's tobacco business, perhaps due to a failed deal, and took out their anger on his daughter. However, the police couldn't find any evidence to support this theory. Time passed, and the police couldn't make progress. There was neither a motive nor evidence to find the culprit. Even experienced police officers didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, societal pressure was mounting. The only lead that demanded substantial police resources was the blue Chevrolet Nova. Police spoke with all owners of similar blue cars in the state of Florida. In Georgia, they couldn't do this because in 1992, the state lacked a database of car colors. Officers went door to door, interviewing car owners. Several times they felt they were onto something, such as when they discovered that an owner of a similar model lived across the street from one of the girls, or when they found a former convict acting suspiciously at the crime scene. But all these promising leads didn't amount to anything. Suddenly, a woman called the sheriff's office in Tallahassee. She claimed to know who shot the girls because she was on the beach when it happened. This call was a godsend for the police, giving them renewed hope that the case would be solved. She said the man's name was Sam Haynes, and he lived near the beach. However, when asked to identify herself, she hung up. She had called from a payphone, so tracing her location was impossible. Although the police desperately wanted to find her, as she confessed to being involved in the crime, they couldn't locate her. It turned out that despite Sam living near the beach, he was actually working at a construction site in Atlanta, Georgia, 6 hours away from the crime scene. Investigators suspected Sam might have followed the girls when they drove that day. Upon learning he was being sought, Sam contacted the police himself. He claimed he was at work in Atlanta on March 27th and insisted someone was lying about him. Sam suspected it was Linda, his ex-wife's sister. As it turned out, Sam was not mistaken. Linda accused her former brother-in-law of the high-profile murder of the two girls as revenge for mistreatment of her sister. It's remarkable she took this step, considering she could have been arrested herself. In any case, detectives spent a lot of time in vain. If it weren't for the next crucial event, they wouldn't have solved the case, no matter how hard they worked. On Friday, May 15th at 10 a.m., the sheriff's office received another call. It was a resident of Tallahassee claiming to know who killed Megan and Cherish. The killer was her ex-boyfriend, Robert Neil Rodriguez. This sounded familiar to the investigators, who had lost hope of it being anything other than another scorned ex. So they asked her why she thought he had killed someone. But the woman said he confessed himself. Robert had called her the previous evening and told her everything, convincing her he was serious. He begged her to wait until the next morning to call the police. She kept her promise. One detective thought the man's name sounded vaguely familiar and reviewed the list of people involved in the case. Robert's name was indeed on it because he owned a blue car, though not a Chevrolet Nova, but a 1979 Plymouth Volare, a model very similar to the Chevrolet. The caller couldn't provide any more information, particularly about Robert's current location, but she knew he planned to leave town and was armed. She added that he had previously lived with his mother in Tallahassee, about an hour's drive from Alligator Point Beach. Robert's neighbors confirmed he had moved out of the apartment on May 2nd or 3rd. During the search of his apartment, books on death and other items suggesting a specific, possibly depressed state of mind were found, but no weapon. The police stations around the country were informed of the new suspect's description. Meanwhile, the investigators tried to recall what Robert had told them that caused them to strike his name from the suspect list. But as they began to delve into his past, they were horrified to realize that he was a former police officer from Portland, Oregon. He served in the police force for 2 years, from 1975 to 1977. The officers were shocked because the murderer who committed such a terrible crime could have been one of them. When they approached him about his blue car, he immediately claimed to be a former police officer himself and offered to undergo a polygraph test. But the police stated that it was just a routine check and left him alone. As it turned out, they were wrong. Incredibly, just 8 hours after the woman's call at 6 p.m., the police phone rang again. This time, it was a man introducing himself as Robert Neil Rodriguez. Being a former police officer, he immediately provided his driver's license number to prove it was really him. Then Robert convinced the officer that he was the one who committed the murder. He simply confessed. Robert provided the police with information known only to the killer. For example, the fact that Megan had a towel on her face. He even said he was calling from a payphone on the road in New Mexico, heading to the Grand Canyon National Park, driving his Plymouth. Robert's voice sounded so detached and subdued that detectives feared he might do something foolish. Detectives asked him to surrender to help him, but Robert said it was too late for him and he wouldn't go to prison. He feared that as a former police officer, he would have a hard time in prison. Detectives hurried to find the man, but were also afraid to show his photo in the news. They feared that if Robert's photo appeared in the news, he might do something irreversible, or someone else might take matters into their own hands. The next morning, on May 16th in New Mexico along the route to the Grand Canyon National Park, a blue Plymouth was found on the highway. The license plates on the car were from Utah, but when they checked them, it turned out they had been stolen on May 8th from a parking lot in Utah. The car was just parked on the highway. Inside sat a man who matched the description of Robert Rodriguez. He looked as though he had lost consciousness. A vial with a white substance dangled from a leather lace around his neck, and a handwritten note lay on the dashboard. The note was addressed to anyone who found the man. In it, Robert, confirming it was indeed him, wrote that he had taken cyanide and under no circumstances should anyone try to revive him with artificial respiration, as the rescuer might get poisoned themselves. On the passenger seat was a notebook, where Robert explained in more detail that he had consumed cyanide mixed with scotch for the parents of Megan and Cherish and to avoid imprisonment. There was a gun in the car, but it was a .22 caliber, not the one used to fire the deadly bullets. However, the most intriguing part was that according to Robert's final promise, the Florida police should expect a letter from him detailing how and why he killed the girls. When the parents of the girls heard the news, they were shocked and puzzled. Megan's father wondered, could they have hired a former police officer as a hitman? He couldn't fathom the idea that a stranger could shoot his daughter just like that. He believed it must have been a professional killer. Meanwhile, Cherish's mother, upon learning about the discoveries during the search of Robert Rodriguez's home, wondered if he was a serial killer who hated women. If he was so obsessed with killings, shouldn't he have killed more than 2 people by his age? Of course, at that time, she didn't know how close to the truth she was. And then, on May 18th, the first letter from Robert surfaced. It didn't go to the police, but to a newspaper. In it, he disclosed where the police should look for his body because initially Robert had intended to reach the canyon. He also claimed that he would be sought in connection with 3 committed murders. Incredibly, he admitted that the police themselves wouldn't have been able to link him to 3 murders, but he simply couldn't stay silent. In 1984, he killed another innocent girl, Valerie Hunt. That his 3rd victim was Valerie Hunt. He killed her in 1984, and the police will receive all the details about the murders by mail. Valerie was a 22-year-old student from Tallahassee. Her body was found in September of that same year near the pond. The police initially treated the case as a disappearance, possibly suspecting she had run away, but everyone who knew her didn't believe she would willingly disappear. Her boyfriend reported her disappearance when her boss called to say she hadn't shown up for work, although she was always reliable. Like Megan and Cherish, Valerie went to the pond to swim and sunbathe. She frequented the area often, was a strong swimmer, and it was incredible that she drowned. The cause of her death was undetermined because her body was heavily decomposed. Now, finally, it became clear that she was Robert Rodriguez's first victim. On the 19th, finally, a letter arrived at the police, after which Robert's messages were received by the families of all his victims, his friends, and former girlfriends with whom he had good relationships. The police didn't disclose the details of the message until they had verified every word from the man. They asked the families of the girls to do the same, but Megan's father decided differently. He saw both letters, Megan and Cherish's families, and said they were practically identical, with no hint of an apology in either. Robert revealed the details of how he committed the crime, although Megan's father would have preferred him not to. On March 27th, around noon, Robert entered a cafe near Alligator Point Beach. It was he who ordered a Bloody Mary cocktail and insisted on paying for it. The bartender confirmed this when she saw his picture. He left the establishment around 1 p.m. and headed to the beach. Witnesses who found the bodies passed Megan and Cherish at 1:45, and they were already dead. That is, after leaving the bar, he immediately went to the beach where he saw the girls and killed them. He was haunted by a fantasy in which he raped, beat, and killed a girl. These thoughts had plagued him for a long time, and he couldn't find an explanation or justification for this obsession. And though he dreamed of violence, he assured the police and the girls' families that he hadn't done anything like that to Valerie, Megan, or Cherish. After killing Valerie, he told himself he could live a normal life and that if he did it again, he would kill himself. And then, when he came across Megan and Cherish, he couldn't hold back. They did nothing to provoke him. He had never met them before, but chose them because they were young, attractive, and vacationing in a remote area. It was all over in seconds. He shot Megan first. Cherish began to scream and back away. Then he shot her. Megan had a towel in her hand and it fell over her head when he shot. Then he shot each one more time to make sure they were dead before fleeing. All the letters were written matter-of-factly, and there was practically no emotion in them. It must have been very difficult to read them. Megan's mom again raised the question that worried everyone. How could he harbor this passion for murder for 8 long years before killing again? Megan's father speculated that Robert became engrossed in religion, then lost faith again, and therefore killed again. But investigators noticed another interesting pattern. He divorced shortly before Valerie's murder in 1984. And he had just broken up with his girlfriend before Megan and Cherish's murders. One of his church friends said he sometimes got angry about relationships. Maybe that's how he vented his anger. And his mother died on Easter morning in 1992, and since he no longer had any truly close people, he decided to confess everything. The pastor of his church said Robert was struggling internally. His loving and caring nature fought against the evil inside him. He stuttered about suicide at least twice, and he was taking medication previously used to treat depression, but its effect was linked to aggressive behavior and thoughts of harming himself. When people gathered for service on Sunday, May 17th, and didn't see Robert, they couldn't believe what they had learned about him. They called him Bob, sincerely loved him, helped others, and he wasn't the person they read about in the news. One woman said it was so much like him, warning that he had taken cyanide. Another admitted she wouldn't be able to read news about criminals and judge them as before because she knew one personally. She will think about the people who loved this man, because they exist, and she is one of them. It's clear that Robert didn't understand the reason behind his obsession and didn't want to harm innocent strangers. It's unfortunate that he couldn't overcome his inner demons and stop himself before taking the lives of 3 innocent individuals, Valerie Hunt, Megan Carr, and Cherish Disantis, and breaking the hearts of both their loved ones and his own.